Hey everybody, Danielle Hargenrader here, and welcome to another episode of Unleash Your Inner Diabetes Dominator. I am so excited to bring you another awesome person who is thriving with diabetes. I'm going to read his bio, and then we're going to get right into the story. Dr. Cyrus Khambatta is an internationally recognized nutrition and fitness coach who specializes in type 1 and type 2 diabetes and has helped many clients reduce their insulin usage by 25 to 60%. Cyrus has been living with type 1 diabetes for 13 years and has reduced his insulin usage by more than 40% using his evidence-based approach to nutrition and fitness. He leads interactive lectures that teach why a low-fat, whole-food, plant-based lifestyle is the gold standard approach for eliminating insulin resistance, the underlying cause of all blood sugar fluctuation in type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So Cyrus, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing well, doing well. You read that bio perfectly.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, well, you wrote it well, so it wasn't too hard. I can read, believe it or not. So, Cyrus, why don't you give us a little bit of background on you, because we want to know your story. Tell us about your story of diagnosis, which according to your bio was 13 years ago, and kind of the road you traveled to get from there to, which I'll go into much more questions about later, to the 80-10-10 lifestyle that you lead now.
Definitely. Okay, so I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 22. So it was my senior year of college, and you can picture the scene. I was maybe 6 months away from graduating. I was really excited. I had a job lined up, and I was in the middle of finals, and all I really wanted to do was just take my finals, lay out in the sun for the next 3 or 4 months, and then be done with school. So I'm studying for finals. It's November, and I just noticed that things were not functioning properly in my body. I've always grown up as an athlete, so I have a pretty good understanding of my body. And I noticed a couple of things. Number one, I was drinking on the order of 2 gallons of water per day, which is very unusual for me. Number two, I was urinating between 17 and 22 times per day, which was once every half an hour. And then number three, I had no energy. My friends were telling me that I would eat a plate of food and then I would basically fall asleep either at the table or immediately afterwards. So I finally checked myself into the health clinic on campus, and they checked my blood glucose. It was a 650. So blood glucose is supposed to be between 80 and 130 on a given day, and my blood glucose was about 6 times higher than it needed to be. So I didn't know anything about diabetes at this point. I'm just studying engineering, and that's what health is not necessarily part of my vocabulary. So all of a sudden I get these words: type 1 diabetes, insulin, pancreas, and I was like, well, I don't know what any of this stuff means. So I go to the hospital. 24 hours later, I get discharged from the hospital. I now have a prescription for test strips. I have a prescription for insulin. I have a nutritionist. I have a carbohydrate counting strategy. And most importantly, I was afraid. I was incredibly afraid. So I left that hospital with this sense of fear that would just cripple me for the next year of my life. So I go back to school. I try and start living the life that I had lived before. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, I was a 22-year-old guy. I was pretty stubborn, and I was just kind of stuck in my ways. And all I wanted to do was just live the college experience. And I didn't want to have to deal with this chronic metabolic condition. I didn't want to have to tell people that I was living with diabetes now. And so what I did was I didn't change anything. I just thought to myself, maybe if I pretended like this wasn't there, it'll disappear. And over the course of time, I've talked to so many people with type 1 diabetes, and I've seen that that's actually a very common response to getting diagnosed when it's very unexpected.
Yes.
So I lived that way for probably, realistically 2 to 3 months, and then I recognized that my blood glucose was all over the place. On any given moment when I check my blood glucose, it could be a 70 or it could be a 470, and I just had no control. So at that point, I said, all right, I'm going to start listening to what my doctor's saying. So my doctor told me at that point, he said, all right, listen, the most effective way of controlling your blood glucose is to go into a low carbohydrate diet. And so I said, okay, fine, I'll do a low carbohydrate diet. So under the guidance of both my doctor and my nutritionist at that point, I opted for a low carbohydrate diet, and I was increasing my intake of foods that were higher in fat and higher in protein. So that was supposed to make my blood glucose much more manageable, but it actually, in my situation, did the exact opposite. So over the course of the next 9 months or so, my blood glucose became this roller coaster where it was up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And it would do that like 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10 times a day. And when my blood glucose was all over the place and totally unpredictable, it took such a mental and emotional toll on me that I got to a point somewhere about a year into this process where I will never forget this moment. I call this my rock bottom moment. I was sitting on a couch. It was about 4 days after I had played a game of soccer. And I grew up playing soccer, running, playing basketball, you name it. So I'm sitting on a couch 4 days after a game, and I was tight everywhere, in my chest, in my abs, in my butt. I felt like a steel rod. I checked my blood glucose. It was 255, 270. I took my blood glucose meter. I threw it across the room. It smashed into 100 pieces, and then I started crying. And I said, there has got to be a better way. I refuse to believe that this is how I have to live the rest of my life. So at that point, I basically decided to start reading everything under the sun. And I picked up every book I could possibly get my hands on about diabetes, about health. And one thing led to another, and I got introduced to this idea of maybe becoming a plant-based eater. So I said, okay, great. Like, I have an open mind. Finally, let's see if this works. So after talking with a lot of health coaches and nutritionists, I ended up coming across one in particular. His name is Dr. Doug Graham, and he's actually the creator of the 80-10-10 diet. He wrote a book called the 80-10-10 diet. And he took me under his wing and said, Cyrus, I'll show you exactly how you can implement this plant-based, but most importantly, low-fat approach. He says, carbohydrates have nothing to do with this game, and I promise you that. Let me show you. So I said, fine. I went under his supervision. I went to a retreat. Over the course of the next week, he showed me how to implement a high carbohydrate, low-fat diet where I was eating just fruits and more vegetables and a small amount of nuts and seeds. And this was obviously very foreign to me because before that, I was drinking milk and eating cheese and peanut butter. So it was a very sharp dietary transition, but the numbers don't lie. Because what happened to me over the course of that 7-day period was that my insulin usage fell by 30% in 1 week, while my carbohydrate intake increased by 5-fold. So before that, I was eating something like 125 grams of carbohydrate per day. And then I immediately transitioned to a diet that contains 500 plus grams of carbohydrate per day. So you would expect that my insulin usage would also go up significantly, but it went the opposite direction. But most importantly, it felt like I got my energy back. So I was able to return to sports. I was able to start playing soccer again. I was able to start cycling, running. And in a very short period of time, I felt like my body was given back the energy that it had been robbed of for about a full year. So when I put everything together, I said, okay, now I have more energy. My blood glucose is under control. It's very predictable. My insulin use is down. I'm eating a completely new diet. I'm loving this lifestyle. I really am. And so fast forward, a couple of years, I saw this exciting experiment that was happening under the surface. And I said to myself, I want to know the actual molecular biology underlying this because there's too much confusion out there. So I put myself back to school.
Yeah, that's what I asked you. At what point did you decide? I'm sorry, are you hearing that feedback?
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. Yeah, people know this is like real life here. This is not a produced show. But so did you finish school for engineering and then decide later on that you're going to go back and get, I think, what is it, like bio? What was it? Tell us what your degree is in and how that kind of synced up.
Good question. Okay, so I graduated from undergraduate at Stanford University in 2003 with a degree in mechanical engineering. So that was my bachelor's in mechanical engineering. Then for the next 2 years, I had gone to work as a mechanical engineer. During that 2-year time frame is when these personal changes were starting to happen. And I started to notice a huge change in my diabetes health. So at that point, I put myself back to school to start getting prerequisites in the field of biochemistry because there was something speaking to me which said biochemistry is the subject to learn. So I was taking prerequisite classes, at which point, starting in 2007, is when I actually started a PhD program at UC Berkeley. So I basically did a PhD program for 5 years in nutritional biochemistry. And I like to describe that as the super nerd research that underlies a lot of medical recommendations. So when you read in the newspaper about, blueberries have a ton of antioxidants or, walnuts are linked to decreased Alzheimer risk, it's the nutritional biochemists that are the ones discovering that information, and then that somehow gets propagated into the media.
So that's pretty awesome and a really interesting kind of course of events that occurred there for your, progression. And so are you now completely done with engineering? Obviously, you run retreats and we'll talk about that. So your life changed. Again, most people that I talk to have a story where their lives changed for the better. because of diabetes. Would you say that that's
Absolutely.
kind of your story as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would go so far as to say that diabetes is actually the single best thing that has ever happened to me. Because what it did was it forced me to take a look at my life at a very young age, at the age of 22, and ask myself some really hard questions. And the questions I would ask myself are, what are you willing to do in order to improve your health? How far are you willing to go? What is your health worth to you? What changes are you willing to make? And so at that point, I started to make these transitions, and I started to see such an improvement in such a short period of time that within a short period of time, I said to myself, wow, diabetes has really opened up a whole new universe of people, of information, of opportunity that just was never even part of my vocabulary leading up to that.
Yeah, awesome. So tell us a little bit about what you do now. Tell us about your retreat, because you do have a retreat coming up, and I want everybody to know about that. But when you're not running retreats, what is your daily business like?
Very good question. So 2.5 years ago, I started a business as a nutrition and fitness coach, specifically for people, mainly for people with diabetes, whether it's type 1 diabetes like myself, pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, or gestational diabetes. And the reason why I chose to focus on diabetes in general is because I spent my entire graduate degree studying it. But most importantly, all of those conditions actually have the exact same root cause, right? So to actually cause might not be the right word, but the underlying condition is the same. So that underlying condition is called insulin resistance. So I spent my entire graduate degree studying insulin resistance, what causes it, and most importantly, how to reverse it. So what I do is I effectively teach people how to quantify insulin resistance, and then how to implement tools into their life so that they can start to reverse insulin resistance and see a number of changes, including number 1, improved energy, number 2, weight loss, number 3, decreased medication, whether that's oral medication like something like metformin, or it's something like a statin medication, or it could be a blood pressure medication, and a decreased usage of insulin. And so one thing I like to add to that too is that a lot of people living with type 1 diabetes don't recognize that they are actually insulin resistant, because in the medical world, and especially in the type 1 diabetes world, the term insulin resistance is only associated with type 2 diabetes. And over the course of the last decade, I found that to be absolutely not true. It's not true from a research perspective, and it's not true from an actual experiential perspective. So what I do is I actually show how eating a low carbohydrate diet / high fat diet, which is effectively what a low carbohydrate diet is, that actually predisposes you towards insulin resistance. And as a result of becoming insulin resistant, blood glucose variability starts to go up. So you get higher highs and lower lows. And when the blood glucose variability goes out of whack, then your medication usage starts to go up. So I teach people how to recognize those patterns. I teach people how to squash that variability so that their blood glucose is much more predictable. And then as a result of that, it's their program. They can implement it how they want, and they can live their most active life.
That's super interesting. And as a fellow science nerd, I'm a nutritionist. My degree's in, nutrition science. I'm not a doctor. However, I am fascinated by all things nutrition, how the human body works, even on a chemical level, physiological level. And so as a devil's advocate, not, that I just have to say things, is there, now this for you and what you've done, this works for people across the board, or is there ever a body chemistry or body type where this type of diet doesn't necessarily always have the same results, or what have you found over your years of doing this?
That's a fantastic question. To say that there's one diet that's a one-size-fits-all prescription for every person on the planet is a stretch, because there's no such thing. So I'm not necessarily saying that this approach is going to solve the world's problems as far as health is concerned. But what I have seen, I'll be honest, when I first got involved in this, I had no idea. I had literally no idea if this type of information, if following a plant-based diet, and that is a low-fat diet, was actually going to benefit people. Mm-hmm. I was just hoping that it would work because I knew all about it in the research world. So then I started practicing it, and I saw such rapid results in such a short period of time that it started to make me an even stronger believer. So not only had I experienced it, now I was helping other people experience it. Point being, this approach absolutely works for type 2 diabetes. There's no question about it, because In type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance is actually the cause, right? It's a two-step process. You cannot be type 2 diabetic without being insulin resistant. It's insulin resistant. It's not possible. So if you can minimize or eliminate insulin resistance, then type 2 diabetes can either get minimized or can go away completely. But when it comes to people with type 1 diabetes, I see the same patterns over and over and over again, which is that a high-fat diet actually predisposes you to insulin resistance. And effectively what that means is that when you consume fat from the outside world, and a high degree of fat, we're talking anything in excess of 30 grams of fat per day, okay? Your average type 1 consumes about 80 to 90 to 100 grams of fat per day, okay? And again, that's because they're minimizing their carbohydrate intake. So on a diet that's got anywhere greater than 30 grams of fat per day, you're consuming fat, you're burning some of that fat, but you're also storing a lot of that fat. That fat gets stored in your adipose tissue, but most importantly, it gets stored in your muscle tissue, and it gets stored in your liver. As soon as your muscle and liver start to accumulate fat, the two of those tissues lose their ability to recognize insulin. And as soon as that happens, then your insulin requirements go up. So what we really have to do is basically reduce the fat intake in your diet such that those two tissues can clear out their internal fat stores. And as soon as they do that, then they regain their ability to respond to insulin, at which point insulin requirements start to fall significantly. So to answer your question, a long-winded way of saying, yes, this works in a lot of people. I've seen more than an 85% success rate across all people with diabetes. And, you know, there is a small proportion of people for whom this approach doesn't seem to be working. And, you know, I am a scientist and I'm still trying to figure out exactly why that is the case.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate the explanation. And I have about 300 other questions, as I'm sure other watchers that are really into like different dietary lifestyles have, but that'll be for another interview.
Okay.
Because I really do want to talk about, so for people out there who actually really want to kind of immerse themselves in trying to learn a new dietary lifestyle. You know, for me, whenever I try something new, I like to go all in. I like to try it out, really get involved. And so you have a retreat that you have developed so that people can come and actually live in this. They don't have to actually think about it so much, where you kind of give them all the food, you give them all the knowledge. And so talk a little bit about your retreat, when that is, and kind of what people can expect.
Great question. Thank you. So my business is called Mango Man Nutrition and Fitness, and I run retreats in collaboration with two other health coaches that live down in Southern California. And the first one is named Robbie Barbaro, or Mindful Diabetic Robbie. He's all over Instagram and Snapchat. And then there's another woman named Jules Christine, who is her father actually reversed type 2 diabetes under our guidance. Point being, the three of us, we're health coaches, and we basically put on retreats every 4 to 6 months. The next retreat is coming up in June. It's June 2nd to June 5th of 2016. It's down in a place called Idlewild, California. And the way that we structure it is it's a 4-day long retreat. And during those 4 days, we come and we provide all the food for you. So it's a vegan, low-fat diet. It's incredibly tasty. We get the freshest produce from all around. We try and get as much organic as possible. So we provide breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then we have snacks, so you'll never go hungry. We have 2 exercise sessions per day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. And then we have 3 scientific lectures per day. So I lead a lecture in the morning, Robbie will lead a lecture in the middle of the afternoon, and then Jules will lead a lecture at the end of the day. And these lectures cover everything from what are the causes of insulin resistance, how do you structure an exercise regimen, are you an emotional eater? How do you figure that out? How do you purchase food from the outside world for a small cost? What are the logistics of food preparation and food buying? And then actually the most exciting part of this retreat actually is that we always have an actual MD on staff. So we have a physician who's board certified to be there so that they can guide all of the participants into making adjustments to their own medication when necessary. And that's important actually, because this is such a powerful approach that usually within the first 3 to 4 to 5 days, we see people with type 1 diabetes have a significantly reduced need for insulin, and they need guidance in understanding exactly how much less insulin to give themselves. Same thing happens for people with type 2. We've gotten some people off of metformin in as little as 3 or 4 days, and it stays for the rest of their life. So we want to make sure that we have expert guidance so that people aren't making incorrect changes to their medication and then putting themselves in a dangerous position.
That's awesome. You're really covering all bases there, which I love. And this is kind of a question for me, but other people might be thinking it too. Are you teaching people how to prep meals there as well?
Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so at our last two retreats, we did not. We actually just said, here, we spoon-fed everyone. This retreat and all retreats from here on out, we are exactly doing that because people have requested that, how do you make this food? I want to learn how to make this food. So every single day, we're going to bring people into the kitchen and we're going to actually have them prepare food so that they understand how to do it. They get a hands-on approach and then they can do it when they go back home.
Perfect. I think that's really important for me. Like, I love to cook, and even for people that don't love to cook though, but even though I feel like I have a great handle on, you tell me how to do something, I can do it. There's nothing better that it's going to teach me more than if you bring me in and you're like, here, let's do this together. And then I'm like, oh, I got this. So I think most people kind of have that experiential kind of learning thing. So that's awesome. We were talking about this off air. I actually would love to go, but I will be in Scotland at that time. But I definitely want to go to one of the retreats in the future because I love to learn. And I think that, you have a lot to teach. So it'd be awesome. But you mentioned this when you were talking about it, and I wanted to know this personally, and people might want to know. So how did you get the nickname Mango Man? Is it just because you eat tons of mangoes? Is that it?
Great question. So I lived in Hawaii, actually. This was 2005 to 2007. So it was during that phase, just leading up to graduate school. I was living in Hawaii. I was taking all these prerequisite classes to prepare me for graduate school. And what I would do is I had a pickup truck and a bucket. Literally one of those 5-gallon painter's buckets, and I had it in the back of my truck, and I would just travel around the island, and I would scout out all of the mango trees between my house and work, and it was like a 20-mile drive. So I literally had constructed a map that probably had, no exaggeration, 50 mango trees on it of different varieties. So I would go by almost every single tree on a daily basis, and then I would talk to the owners, and I would say, hey, can I eat your fallen mangoes? And most people think that as soon as a mango falls on the ground that it's bad. And I was like, no, trust me. So I started to get all these mangoes that were fallen soldiers, and I would put them into this bucket, and then I would just continue to the next tree. So I did that for the course of probably 6 months or so. And I was eating so many mangoes at that time that one of my good friends was like, you probably hold the world record for most mangoes eaten in a day. And I was like, that's a good question. So we did the math, and it turns out that I was actually eating 23 mangoes a day for 3.5 months.
Oh my God.
And that was just by straight personal choice. And I can tell you, like, I've never performed athletics better. I've never felt better. All my blood markers were in line. Blood glucose was totally manageable. And so that's where the name Mango Man kind of came around, and it just stuck. So I actually applied to the Guinness Book of World Records to see if I could set the world record for mango eating. And apparently the Guinness Book of World Records doesn't sponsor food eating records because they think it promotes unhealthy competition. So I'd have to go to something else to do it. So I never set that record, but apparently I hold the unofficial world record for mangoes eaten.
Nice. That's very interesting. I like it. And I just like the name Mango Man. That's easy. It's like Diabetes Dominator. It's just like, the phonetic. It sounds good. It's awesome. All right. So what else are you working on that you would like people to know about? So we talked about your retreat. We talked about what you do. Is there anything else? Any other projects? Any upcoming kind of future 5 years from now? What's the Mango Man going to be doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually writing a book right now.
Awesome.
So similar to the way that you've written a book, I'm writing a book, and the focus of this book is, again, it's going to be teaching why insulin resistance is such an important condition in the diabetes world, but not necessarily just in type 2 diabetes, absolutely in type 1 diabetes. And so the whole focus is understanding what insulin resistance really is and what causes it, because every single time you open your mouth, you have the opportunity to become more insulin resistant or the opportunity to become more insulin sensitive. And once you recognize that every single event is an opportunity, then you start to recognize, oh, I can move myself towards more insulin sensitivity in the long term, and that will severely reduce my insulin requirements and my medication requirements. So this book basically explains how that process unfolds and then gives a step-by-step description of first do this, then do this, then measure this, then do this, right? So it's kind of a description of my personal experience, the biochemistry underlying insulin resistance, and then an actual program so that people can implement this on their own.
Awesome. And not to put you on the spot, and if you don't have the answer, that's also okay, but when might we expect this book?
Good question. Depends on when you ask me. So right now it's April. The book could be ready by as early as October of this year, 2016. And I may actually delay it for a number of other reasons, but it may actually come out in about January of 2017. So I can confidently say that it will be out within the next 9 months and could be out as early as 6 months from now.
All right, cool. Sounds good. I like it. So before we kind of grill you for your top 3 tips, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the diabetes online community out there that may want to hear more from Cyrus?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, one of the things I've learned about living with diabetes is that we can become kind of set in our ways in a number of, if our doctor tells us something, we're likely to believe it because our doctor is a credible source of information. If a nutritionist tells you something, you're likely to believe it because they're a credible source of information. If you hear something on a radio program that didn't come from a medical professional, you're less likely to believe it, right? Point being is that over the course of time, we sort of amass information, more information, more information, more information, and then we try and apply these principles into our lives. And what I see over and over and over again is that a lot of people with diabetes, Albert Einstein was the first person to say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I see that actually, unfortunately, happening in the diabetes population, both type 1 and type 2. Where people are doing the same thing over and over and over again, and they're saying, how come my blood glucose is high? How come I don't have any energy? How come I gained 20 pounds over the last 6 months, right? And I'm not in any way trying to point fingers, but I do see this sort of this process by which we get caught in our ways, and part of it is due to the fact that our minds get more closed over time. And so one of the things that I have personally had to do myself, and that I encourage all of my clients to do, is say just open your mind, first step, and get to a point where maybe there's something that either you don't know or something that you do know that could be leading you in the wrong direction. And as soon as you open your mind, that's when the real epiphany starts to happen, right? Regardless of what the change is, whether the change is low fat, high fat, more exercise, more stress, less stress, it doesn't matter. The fact is, the first domino that has to fall, in my opinion, is you got to open your mind to the idea that maybe there's a better way. And as soon as that happens, I see people just thrive. And that's really what I love to see when I try and help individuals out.
Yeah, I love it. I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is what you're saying there is pretty much what I preach constantly about. It's what we believe is and is not possible in life that allows us to create the life that we want, or that create the life that we have that we might not want. And
Correct.
That's the kind of same thing that happened for me with diabetes. Like, oh, I thought, I'm cursed. I'm going to be, 200 pounds for the rest of my life. This is a horrible thing. And then through lots of personal development and learning, and like you said, opening my mind and choosing to believe other things, I completely changed my life. And I've seen tons and tons of people do that again. Like you said, whether it's diabetes related, any health thing, job related, it really doesn't matter.
Right.
It's your power of choice and your power of belief. I mean, there's tons of things that I believed 15 or 20 years ago that the thought of me believing them now is like absurd. Just like we used to believe that the earth was flat and whatever, it's just, we all have that power to change our beliefs, open your mind, as you say. And I totally agree. And then once that does happen, the floodgates open and nothing is impossible. And I totally agree with that. And I think that that's a great kind of message to share as much as possible from all sources, because it's necessary.
Definitely. And I know how much you focus on mindset too. And I think that's so important, because you can't expect to make changes to your daily habits without first changing, or at least opening your mind to the possibility that those habits are actually going to work.
Yep.
And once you open your mind to it, then it does, like we said, the habits are much less important than the actual, opening of your sort of like cognitive powers to the idea that maybe there is a better way.
Yep. Awesome. I love it. So why don't you share now what have been, obviously we know we've heard what you eat and things like that. So that can also be one of your tips, but what have you found to be, Cyrus's top 3 tips for thriving with diabetes?
Good question. Cyrus's top 3 tips for thriving with diabetes. Okay. Number 1, most importantly, eat a diet that contains less than 30 grams of fat per day and no more. That is number 1. That is the most powerful tip I can possibly give. Number 2, be active. on a daily basis. And the term active is different for every single one of us. Whether I know you do CrossFit, whether you go and do a high intensity CrossFit class, whether you get in the pool and swim around for 20 minutes at a low intensity, whether you're on an elliptical machine watching the Super Bowl, I don't care. Move every single day. And then number 3 would be do your best to really focus on minimizing your stress levels. And I know that's kind of a vague statement, but what I have seen over and over and over again, that no matter, you can get your diet dialed in, you can get your exercise regimen dialed in, and your sleep habits perfect. If there's an underlying chronic element as a result of stress or anxiety, it can derail not only diabetes, but it can set you up for heart disease. It can redistribute fat all across your body. It can impair your thyroid function. It really is this, I like to think of it as a metabolic trump card. So unless your stress levels are really low, you run the risk of exacerbating existing health conditions or creating new ones.
Yep. Awesome. I like it. And oftentimes 2 and 3 can be related, because if you get into a regular exercise routine, and again, I do CrossFit, but I also do my second most important thing is getting outside and walking. I mean, it might not seem to like a big deal to most people, but it's the walking, but B, it's being outside. It's just, I can't stress enough to people the power of nature. And at the risk of sounding like a hippie tree hugger, which I kind of am, like, just go outside, feel the sun, even if it's snowing, like, it doesn't matter. Just feel the air. It really is healing for the body. And if you're stressed out, and you just leave your cell phone like in the house, and even just go outside around the block and just say, I'm going to be alone and quiet for 5 minutes, it's a stress reducer. And there's just no way to get around that. So be outside more, take a walk. Don't feel like you have to kill yourself with exercise, but it just makes all the difference in the world. So
there's no doubt. I mean, there's even some peer-reviewed research which clearly shows that reducing your stress levels can help reverse heart disease, and it can help reverse diabetes, and it can help with cancer treatment. So, I mean, this is not just some hippie, idea. This is an actual, this is actual human physiology that we're talking about.
Awesome. So so at least my instincts are right.
Yeah, I'm a hippie on the inside too, whatever that means. I mean,
just means that I love the earth. And I was actually talking to another person. I go outside and I will actually like touch plants. And my husband yells at me all the time. He's like, you're going to end up getting some kind of rash. He's like, you don't even know what you're touching. I'm like, I don't care. It's soft. Like, I touch plants. I will like put my hands in the dirt. Like, I don't care. I just like to be connected to the earth. And I think that's kind of sometimes associated with like a hippie mentality, but that just, might be just a false label. But no, I love the earth. I love nature. And I totally give it tons of credit for having a lower stress lifestyle, because I have a lifestyle that many people would say, oh, it's high stress. You run your own business and you do other things with your husband and you're traveling like every single month. And I don't have a lot of stress because I love what I do. I love what I do. And I go outside a lot. So
yeah, actually, well, you just brought up, it reminded me of something. One of my very good friends turned to me one day and he said, Cyrus, I think I figured it out. And I said, what? He goes, stress is a choice. If I'm stressed, I am choosing to be stressed, right? It may not be a conscious decision. Sometimes it's an unconscious or a subconscious decision. But the fact of the matter is, because I have the ability to change it, it becomes a choice. So on a daily basis, if I'm finding that I am stressed, I can choose to also be unstressed. And I was like, wow, that's powerful stuff right there.
Mind blowing. Right. Yeah. One of my favorite quotes from one of my biggest mentors, which I mentioned offline, Tony Robbins, is where your focus goes, your energy flows. So if you're focusing on all the stuff that stresses you out and you're like, oh my God, I have this deadline, and oh my God, my blood sugar is this, and oh my God, and all these negative things that you don't want to focus on, but you're giving all your energy to it, of course your energy is going to be all icky. But Absolutely. If you start, we all have so much to be grateful for. Like, I'm a huge gratitude person. You have to be grateful all the time. And people especially in the American culture, we have this tendency to take things for granted. We see, things kind of at face value, but we have running water and we have, roofs over our heads and clothes on our backs. And oftentimes we have tons more than that, but we don't even take the time each day to say, thank you for allowing me to live this life. Thank you for the clothes I have. Thank you for, what I do have to be grateful for. And if you just quietly sit there and do that for 2 minutes, I don't believe that gratitude and stress or fear or anguish can exist in the same moment. So I think that when you continually practice things like that, and that's why I'm a big fan of meditation. I mean, meditation can just literally be you sitting there thinking of all the things that you're grateful for and just stacking them on top of each other. And there's been talk about studies seeing the brain waves change of people when they do that. It's amazing. But it really is just like anything. It's a choice. Everything's a choice. So awesome. So
I actually really like that concept, which is that gratitude and like anger, frustration, negative emotions are mutually exclusive. You think they cannot exist at the same time.
No.
That's really powerful. Actually, I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, instead of you just teaching me everything, I gave you something to think about.
I love it. This is great.
That's good. We can close it off there. Now I look good. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on here, sharing your story, telling about everything that you're doing, which is awesome. And hopefully I'll have you back on sometime in the future after I've had a chance to attend one of your retreats. We can do kind of like a after action review for, as my husband's military term, AAR, an after action review, and that we can go there. But as always, I will link every link that Cyrus gives me under this video, under the YouTube video, under my blog. So, he'll give you the website, he'll give you the chance to check out his retreat and any other way that he wants you to be able to follow him. By the way, his Instagram account is awesome. He puts all these pictures of delicious looking food up all the time. I'm just like, makes me hungry. But either way, I'll post all those links below so you can follow him and check him out. And thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up. If you thought it added value to your life, share the love, and I will catch everybody on the next episode of Unleash Your Inner Diabetes Dominator. Take care, guys.